I have such a cute mug. It's a mushroom. I hope you're having a wonderful autumn and or spring or whatever season it currently is where you are at the moment. In my last video, I talked about all the books that I was reading this autumn, and today I'm going to be recommending you some autumnal reads to get into the autumn spirit. So I'm going to start off with An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. So this is one of my favourite books of all time. So we follow a main character called Isabel, and she's a painter. So she lives in this town which is in this eternal summer, and nobody really goes into the outside world because in their town they're blessed by the Fae. It's really interesting how this book sort of delves into the Fae of folklore. So these Fae can't create anything, and they rely on humans to create beautiful things for them. So these fairies come to this town for their clothes and books and paintings. So Isabel is asked to paint the portrait of a Fae prince, who is the Prince of Autumn, which is where the autumnal vibes are coming from. And it's a really good book. So it's basically a romance between Isabel and the prince, but it's really sweet. So she falls in love with him while she's painting his portrait, and then it all starts going wrong when he sees the painting and he doesn't like it because it shows an emotion in his face, and fairies aren't supposed to show emotions. So he ends up kidnapping her and taking her to the fairyland, and it's all sort of spirals in from there. And it is such a good book. It's so cute. The romance is done so well. The prince, Grook, he is so funny. He very much reminds me of Hal from House of Castle, and Isabel is such a great main character. She's practical, she's sensible, she makes good decisions, and I just really enjoyed it. And I think it's so good for describing sort of the different seasons of the year, and particularly putting you into the mood of autumn. I think you could read this at any point in the year because you do have sort of a description of all the seasons, and it's just really good. So I would highly recommend it. Even if it's not autumn where you are, I would recommend just reading An Enchantment of Ravens if you love anything to do with fairies and fairy tales and really cute slow burn romance. So next on my list of recommendations is in fact House of Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. So I would recommend this any time of year, but I think it's particularly good in autumn, just for the cozy fantasy vibes. It's the perfect book to read curled up under a blanket, looking out at trees that are turning yellow, and it's just so cute. So if you don't know about House of Castle, it's set in this fantasy world, which is very much the world that fairy tales are set in, and it follows a young girl called Sophie Hatter, and she works in a hat shop. Then she's cursed by a witch to turn old, and she goes on an adventure to try and make herself young again, and she meets Hal and his moving castle. So this is so cute. It's a fantasy classic, really, and it's just adorable. The characters are really lovely, the world is really interesting, and I would just recommend this just for some cozy vibes. Okay, so next on the list, we're going a bit more away from the cozy, fun fantasy and going a little bit darker, but not too much. So my next recommendation is The Binding by Bridget Collins. This is partly set in autumn and then also partly set in summer. It's really interestingly structured because you have sort of real time and then you also have flashbacks sort of in the middle of the book, not to try and spoil anything. But it's really good. So when you start off reading it, I found it quite hard to get into at first because you don't know anything and the world building is trickled in so slowly. It's unclear sort of when it's sort of set. I was getting like Victorian Edwardian vibes from it, but in a fantasy sort of setting. So the main premise is that there are bookbinders, and these bookbinders can bind your memories into books. So if there's a memory that you don't want to have anymore, you can have it removed by a bookbinder, and then you'll have it in a book. And then reading the book, you get to re-experience the memory. So the main character, Emmett, is sent by his family to become an apprentice to a bookbinder, and then it's sort of I don't want to spoil anything, but it has the most adorable romance in it. It's heartbreaking, it's so sweet, it's so emotional. As soon as I finished it, I immediately started back at the beginning and reread it all over again. Just, I think, because it takes a while for you to really understand the plot and to understand the different characters and what's going on. Because for a lot of it, you're just stuck in Emmett's head where you don't know anything and you're just plunged straight in. But I would definitely recommend reading the whole thing. And yeah, it's just such a good book. It's so good for autumn in that it's very much looking back on summer with sort of the memories of it, and it's so good. Oh, it's so good. I'd highly recommend. Next on my list is an actual classic. So, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Now, again, this is a sort of an interesting one. This book sort of reminds me of autumn. It's not a cozy, fun book, but it is really interesting. So Wuthering Heights, if you haven't read it or you've never heard of it, is it set in Yorkshire? I feel like it probably is. But it's set in sort of the northern English countryside, and it's basically about terrible romances and toxic relationships in like Victorian England, and then like weird family dynamics. But you've got ghosts, you've got hauntings, you've got death, you've got betrayal. So it's got everything you would want. It's sort of gothic, is it? I don't know. But it's a chilly book, if that makes sense. Like, it's a sort of book that you want to read when it's getting chilly and you want something quite dark and mysterious and to just sort of sweep you away into the olden times. So yeah, if you want something sort of darker and more chaotic, yeah, I would give Wuthering Heights a go. So last on my list is Slewfoot by Brom. I mean, the cover just screams autumn. This book I got mainly because of the illustrations. So you've got the lovely cover, which is incredible, and then inside you have these huge illustrations that are just amazing. So it's so creepy. It's just, so good. And all the chapters have little illustrations of the chapter headings. Let me just show you. So we've got a nice little goat there. So aside from just the really amazing drawings that are in here, so Slewfoot is set in, so it's 1666 in Connecticut in America, and it's set in this sort of settler colonial town, and the main character lives on a farm with her husband on the edge of a forest, and so evil demons and forest spirits are waking up, and it's gory. It's a horror book. It is quite, I don't tend to read a lot of horror. It's not, I wouldn't say it's necessarily scary. It's quite sad at times. It's very creepy. It's very gory. Especially towards the end, you get really into body horror and gore. But, perfect for Halloween, perfect for autumn. It's great for getting into the mood, the spooky season. I really enjoyed this. So if you want something to sort of feel quite spooky when it's coming into Halloween, I would definitely recommend Slewfoot. So those are all my recommendations for books to read in autumn. Do let me know any recommendations that you have, any books that you're always drawn to read during autumn. So thank you for watching, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.